Welcome to Backchecking the Bolts. Backchecking the Bolts is your cup of coffee to get you the latest on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Join host Jason Linkus and the managing editor of Raw Charge, Justin Godfrey, as they break down the Lightning's most recent games and go beyond the highlights, telling you what the box scores didn't. It's time to drop the puck.
It's February 18th. It's late at night, but we're here with Backchecking the Bolts. My co-host is known throughout Baltimore Little League as having one of the best pickoff moves since Tippy Martinez. He's Raw Charge's own Justin Godfrey. Justin, how you doing today?
Not too bad, and I can honestly say it was taught to me by Tippy Martinez. So my one claim to Baltimore fame is I did meet the man, and he did teach me how to pick people off at first base. If only I could have thrown harder than 75 miles an hour, it may have actually meant something in my life.
Now, did he actually teach you how to pick off three guys in an inning? That's still a Tippy Martinez record that'll never be broken.
It's one of the greatest moments of my childhood listening to that on the radio, because I'm pretty sure if I remember they had Len Sakata catching. I want to say somebody was out of position at third base, and so he just decided to pick everybody off. That way nobody had to make any defensive plays.
Well, as I mentioned my co-host Justin Godfrey. I'm Jason Linkus, and I'm live to you tonight from Norfolk, Nebraska, the hometown of Johnny Carson. Well, we got some things to talk about tonight. First of all, we're going to just recap the Olympic action, but today there was some very big Lightning injury news. We're also going to take a look back in Lightning history. We're going to basically take the Wayback Machine from the Lightning inception to 2008. We're going to tell you the best and worst trades the Lightning made during those times. And again, we talked about where you can travel with the Lightning. We're going to take a look at a city. We're going to go a little further south. We were in Winnipeg, Manitoba last episode. We're going to go down to Dallas and give you the lowdown on what to expect when you travel with the Bolts down to Dallas. But first of all, let's recap the Olympic action. Canada with a 4-3 overtime win over Czechia. Mitch Marner with the overtime goal. I'm wondering if he's going to get booed in Toronto every time he touches the puck now that he got that overtime winner. Canada was actually down 3-2 late in the game when Nick Suzuki tied it up. Finland, a 3-2 overtime winner over the Swiss. Arturi Lehkonen, the Colorado Avalanche winger, with the game-winning goal. The U.S. slid by Sweden 2-1 in overtime as well. The U.S. was up 1-0 late in the game. Sweden pulled their goalie, Mika Zibanejad, scored with the goalie, pulled the tie, but Quinn Hughes won it with the overtime winner. And finally, Slovakia defeated Germany by a score of 6-2, the only game that didn't go into overtime. So the semifinals are Finland against Canada, Slovakia against the United States. Real quick, Justin, who do you like in both games?
I think you got to go with the favorites. It really played out well for the United States. This was going to be one of their tougher games. I think them getting Slovakia, who has played really well this tournament, it's going to be probably better matchup for them than Finland will be. That being said, Canada, I think, has a good matchup against Finland as well. A lot of it's going to depend on some of the health. Sidney Crosby may not be playing for Canada. I think we're going to hear more about that tomorrow from the Canadians about the status of his injury because he left early. But as you mentioned, there was some Lightning injury news as well in regards to the Olympics. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting semifinals.
Well, Justin, let's talk about that Lightning injury news. First of all, in the Olympics, defenseman Victor Hedman looked like he was set to go, but he was a last-minute scratch. What's the latest on Hedman?
So far, it's still up in the air. All that we really know is that he suffered a lower body injury in warm-ups for the game before they played the United States. So to me, that means it's something different than what's kept him out for the last 3 months or so. That was definitely an upper body injury, elbow surgery. So it's not related to his previous ailments. And so hopefully it's not something that's super serious. I believe he was on the bench for most of the game. Before the game, the coach did say that he wasn't going to play, and the Lightning are kind of holding their breath right now. They just got him back right before the Olympics. He is still going to be a key part of them down the stretch, so we're going to see. Probably have some more information tomorrow, and The Lightning have dealt with injuries all year, so it's just another one to deal with.
Well, this injury, the next one I'm going to tell you about, Max Crozier, he's out 10 weeks, core muscle injury. This is a big loss for the Bolts. One, who's the next guy up? And two, does this make Tampa a candidate to possibly trade for a defenseman at the deadline?
So a couple questions there. Crozier, it's been a tough year for him, honestly. This is his first full season in the NHL. He made the team out of camp, almost immediately got injured early in the season, came back, started playing regularly, was down on that third pairing with Declan Carlisle while most of the top guys were still injured. He played really well. He doesn't have a flashy game. He can surprise you here and there with some of his offense. It was kind of interesting. It looks like it was the Stadium Series game where he probably got hurt. That was the last game that he played in. And we were kind of wondering, I know we wrote about it over at Raw Charge about why Declan Carlisle was getting more ice time, because you figure when Hedman came back, Carlisle moved to his offside, which is the right side, which Crozier normally plays. Carlisle played those last few games before the break. We did kind of ponder little things. A lot of it had to do with either eligibility, waiver eligibility, things like that. But it appears it was the injury. So now moving forward, that's one of your depth pieces that you don't have anymore. The good news for the Lightning, and why I think they may not immediately go out and grab a defenseman on the market, is that they are still expected to get Emil Lilleberg and Charles-Edouard Destoux back, hopefully right after the Olympic break. I know Destoux was skating. Lilleberg skated a little bit prior to that Stadium Series game, and they were both kind of slated to come back right around the Olympic break. They are both left-handed shots, but they do have experience playing on the right side already this season, so I wouldn't be surprised if they fill in that hole with Crozier missing. If Hedman's injury is long-term, that could change Brisebois' plans, and he might go out and grab, a third pairing, a veteran defender, somebody who's not making too much money. But right now, I think they kind of hold as a roll with what they got, especially if Lilleberg and Destoux are ready to return.
Well, you had mentioned earlier about Sidney Crosby getting hurt. With the Crosby injury, you have to feel that there's probably a few more teams in the Metropolitan Division who feel like they now have a chance at the playoffs. So where the Lightning might have been one of 15, 16 buyers, now there might be as many as 20, 22 that feel that they can get back in it. And I'm talking primarily Columbus, Philadelphia, and Washington, who probably now feel that they have a chance if the Crosby injury is long-term.
These kind of injuries do really change the perception of teams at the kind of on that playoff bubble. As you mentioned, some of these metropolitan teams may think that they now have a shot. At the same time, does Kyle Dubas think, well, we're not going to be buyers this year if Crosby's out long term? Are we sellers now? Do I trade Brian Rust to a contender? It kind of changes things. So I know we're supposed to hear more on Crosby tomorrow. Hopefully, people don't get what I would say the wrong idea out of this, where you now have basically three pretty important players in Kevin Fiala, who broke his leg early in this tournament. Crosby's hurt and Hedman's hurt. I hope people don't use that as an argument as to why the NHL players don't participate in the Olympics. Yes, injuries happen, but at the same time, this has been some of the best hockey we've seen in weeks, as far as just these tournaments are fun. The players really want to play with them, and I hope the owners or the players themselves don't start wanting to back out of the next set of Olympics just because a couple people got hurt. Injuries happen. People can get hit stepping off the bus, and I just hope, like I said, it doesn't lead to NHL players pulling out of the next Olympics.
The one thing, Justin, that I would say, if they're going to participate in the Olympics, they have to find a way to make the schedule a little bit more reasonable for a lot of these teams in March. There are multiple teams that are playing 17 games in 31 days. Then you have the playoffs, which is a whole nother wear and tear on you. I just think that the product will be better if in Olympic seasons, hey, we're going to play 74 games. I know that's never going to happen. The owners want the gate receipts, but the product would be so much better if some of these guys could get 2 days off in March. You're going to see some of these teams have to play 7, 8, 9 defensemen over the course of this time, and God knows how many forwards, but this schedule is just too taxing in March.
Yeah, 100% agree. Like you said, the owners will never go for it. They basically had to be dragged kicking and screaming into the Olympics to begin with. So, them lessening the gate, as you said, cutting down on games is never going to happen. I don't know if you start the season a little bit earlier or if you run it a little bit longer to get that break. But yeah, something has to be done because you have to figure like the players that are participating in this tournament aren't exactly getting any time off whatsoever. We were talking about it before we went on air. I mean, these guys have been either playing back-to-back days or they've only had one day off, and they're going to fly back home depending on when they're kicked out of the tournament by losing, and then maybe get a day or two off here. Whereas the rest of their teammates, yes, they got a nice long break, but these guys that are playing, which are your high-end skill players, they're going to go right from the Olympic grind straight into that March, absolute horrible schedule for folks. So it is, something that the league and the players union probably should take a look at for the next Olympics. Just find a way to spread out some of these games. It was kind of interesting looking at the schedule because the Lightning had, they had a fairly decent amount of days off in December and January. So I don't know if you front load the schedule a little bit, play some of those bulk of the games in November, December, and then that way your March and April is a little bit easier to go with. Or, like I said, maybe extend the season, start a week earlier, let the regular season go a week later. So it's little tinkering things that hopefully they figure out so that the push isn't quite so bad.
Well, we had talked about in our opening that we're going to go back in time and go from the Lightning's inception till 2008 and give you the best and worst trades that the Lightning have made. Justin, I'm going to let you pick. Do you want to go best or worst leading off?
Oh, let's say, why don't we go with worst? Everybody loves to talk about the negative, so let's go ahead and knock that out first. What do you say?
Let's do that. I remember in 1997, the Lightning had a youngster named Chris Gratton who looked like he was going to be a stud. Really did. And then chaos ensued. And Justin, I'm going to let you update everybody as to the 6 degrees of separation of Chris Gratton and what led him to Philadelphia and back to Tampa.
Yeah, it's kind of one of these things that I don't know if any of this happens today. You have a mix of kind of some of that old Wild West GMing going on under the Phil Esposito days. You have a Lightning team that was basically broke at the time. You have a Philly team that's like, hey, we want Chris Gratton. He's a restricted free agent. We're going to offer him this big deal, and we know that the Lightning are broke, so we're going to put in basically the poison pill signing bonus. You have fax machines. You have cell phones that aren't turned on. You had just a little bit about everything. And we did write about it a few years ago, basically on the, I believe it was the 25th anniversary of the whole deal. But for some of you newer fans who maybe aren't quite as up to date on Lightning history, here's basically what happened. In the summer of 1997, as you mentioned, Chris Gratton was a restricted free agent. He had been a Lightning first-round pick. He was really starting to blossom, and he was your prototypical kind of 90s power forward. Big guy with skill, could score, could fight, could do everything. He was kind of the ideal player that GMs were looking for back at the time. The Flyers made him an offer. These are the days when people actually signed offer sheets. So the story as it goes. Now, there's conflicting information here and there, but basically what we've been able to pick out from our research. On August 4th, Phil Esposito traded Gratton to the Chicago Blackhawks for a deal that basically involved Ethan Moreau and Keith Carney. Sometimes those names change around. I've seen different names added to it, but as far as I can tell, those are the names that kind of came through. Now, earlier in that same day, Philadelphia had signed Gratton to a 5-year, $16.5 million offer sheet. Now, as I mentioned, that's not a bad deal for a power forward even back then, and the Lightning probably could have matched it. However, the Flyers had put in a $9 million signing bonus in that first year, and there was absolutely no way that the Lightning were ever going to be able to afford that. That was basically half of their payroll from the previous season. Now, back in the day when you had these kind of contract offers and offer sheets, everything was faxed around. So Philly had to fax a copy to the Lightning. Espo claims back in the day. He kind of laughs about it now, but he claimed that he couldn't read the numbers because they were smudged on the fax paper. Therefore, it wasn't a valid offer. He also argued that he had consummated the trade with Chicago hours before that fax came over, but he couldn't contact the league office because Bill Daly was either at dinner or at a movie and had his cell phone turned off. So therefore,
that screams the NHL.
Exactly. And like, for some of you people who don't understand what the NHL was like in the 90s, this is prototypical for the NHL. Yes, we're a professional league, but crazy stuff like this happens.
Justin, so all you have to do is research the New York Islanders. What happened with their ownership in around 1998.
Exactly.
If you do that, you'll have a riot.
Yeah. So basically, it goes to arbitration. The arbitrator rules in Philly's favor. Philly is allowed to sign Groton to his deal, and the compensation back in the day for that was 4 first-round draft picks. Well, Esposito, he knows his job's on the line. He's not going to take 4 first-round picks because they're not going to help him win, which he basically needs to do in order to fill those seats in order to make money, so he's not canned. So he trades those 4 first-round picks back to the Flyers for Mikhail Renberg and Carl Deikus. Which,
but wait, there's more.
Like, it wasn't a bad deal. Like, Renberg was a pretty good player at the time. He was part of that Legion of Doom line with John LeClaire and
Eric Lindros.
Yeah. So, yeah,
and Dykhouse was a good defenseman.
Yeah, and Dykhouse was a solid, defensive defenseman. So, in theory, those were 2 pieces that could really help the Lightning. Now, the problem is Renberg almost immediately got hurt. I believe he had some wrist problems when he came over for the Lightning. So, less than a year later, basically the 2 teams said, you know what, this isn't working out for either one of us. Groton was struggling in Philly, so they basically reversed the trade. Chris Groton and Mike Sillinger on December 12th, 1998 get traded to the Lightning for Damon Langkow. So the trade's basically reversed. And I think Renberg was in that deal too. I can't remember, but
yeah, I think he might be right. Yeah.
Yeah. I think they just basically sent everybody back to where they were going, and, Espo picks up Sillinger. Now, another benefit that the Lightning get out of it is they got out of that signing bonus. So he didn't have to pay it. The contract is manageable for the Lightning. They get their top center back, and, it doesn't help them, of course, because, anybody who was around for the 97 through basically 2001 years knows that that may have been the worst hockey team ever assembled. Good things came out like Vinny LeCavier, but yeah, so that's probably, I would have to say, up there with one of the worst trades under the Esposito era, so we kind of start off with that one. Start off with the pinnacle. It's something that comes up every once in a while, the smudged fax incident, and it's always delightful to go down memory lane talking about that.
Well, one trade I want to talk about, Justin, is the Lightning, after Darren Pupo, always tried to find a solution in net, and they could not do it. Well, they decided to go old, and they tried to bring back good old Bill Ranford, who won a Stanley Cup at Edmonton in the early 90s, won a ton of games in the league. But around year 19, Bill Ranford was struggling a little bit. So they bring him in on a 2-year deal. And Justin, it just wasn't bad. It was abysmal.
A couple factors leading to this one. You mentioned Darren Pupa. He was hurt at this point. After carrying the team to the playoffs a few years earlier, his back problems came up. He wasn't consistently in net. He had been hurt the previous spring. So the Lightning needed a veteran goaltender, and it was also an expansion year, or an expansion summer. So they wanted to basically leave Pupa unprotected. Hopefully he would get claimed by the expansion team, and they could move on from his contract. In order to do that, they still wanted a veteran goaltender. And then up in Washington, which is where Bill Ranford was playing, he had been usurped by Olaf Kolzig. Kolzig kind of had that breakout year with that long run to the playoffs, to the Stanley Cup final with the Caps. And Ranford, who had been, like you said, a solid goalie for a while, he's now a backup. He didn't want that. He wanted to be traded. He asked to be traded. They were able to work out the deal with the Lightning. And they sent a second round 1998 pick and a third round 1999 pick to Washington for Ranford's services. He was immediately anointed the number one goaltender. And to say it went badly would be an understatement. Bill Ranford, I don't know how many people refer to him as Red Light Ranford, but I know in our circle of friends, he was Bill Red Light Ranford.
He had a sunburn.
The man struggled in net. He ended up playing in 30. He appeared in 32 games with the Lightning that year. He went 3-18-3 with an .881 save percentage and a 3.90 goals against average. And it's kind of funny. Ranford always had his goals against was never great, put it that way. Even in his good years, he was usually above 3. Now, part of that was the nature of the hockey when he played. It was just a more offensive league. But he was always kind of, bolstered in Edmonton by their offense. He comes to Tampa, who did not have a defense, did not have the offense that could help offset that, struggled mightily. I think the Lightning ended up playing 6 goaltenders that year. You had anyone from Corey Schwab to Ranford. Pupa played a few games. Zach Bierk made his debut that year. So it was just an abysmal season for him. Somehow, at the trade deadline, they convinced Detroit to take him off their hands, traded him for basically a conditional pick. And the important thing on that is they were able to get Detroit to take this contract off their hands because he had another year left at just over $3 million a year. And again, that was just, at that time, the Lightning didn't want to pay that. So luckily they were able to get him off their hands. He actually played pretty well for Detroit down the stretch. He appeared in 3 games. He went 3-0-1, had a .918 save percentage and a 196 goals against. So, I'm not going to say it was probably the defense in front of him, but it sounds like it was the defense in front of him. Detroit had.
He also went to one of the best teams in the league too.
Exactly. This is a pre-salary cap Detroit Red Wings team that was just running roughshod over the league. So it was done at the trade deadline, which is also when the Lightning traded Wendell Clark, who they had signed as a free agent and had a really good year for him, even though he was in his mid-30s. They were able to trade Clark to Detroit for Kevin Hodson, who was an up-and-coming goalie. I don't think he ever lived up to the hype that they had him for. So in the Lightning's eyes, it was kind of Clark and Ranford for a pick and Hodson. So, they thought they had their young goalie. It didn't work out that way. But, yeah, it was not a great trade when you consider you gave up a second and third round pick for him.
Now, Justin, the last bad trade we're going to look at, the Lightning initially drafted Roman Hamrlik. I believe he was 4th overall in 92. He was viewed as their defenseman that they were going to build around. And he had some pretty good years in Tampa. Now, he was a minus player in Tampa, but the Lightning were not a very good team up until the 95-96 season when they made their first ever playoff appearance and they ended up losing to the Flyers in 6 games. But Trader Phil lost his patience with Roman Hamrlik, and in December of 97 traded him and the rights to Paul Comrie for Jason Bonsignor, Steve Kelly, and Brian Marchment. Again, we're talking about a team that didn't have a whole lot of young talent, and they traded the cornerstone of that blue line.
Yeah, Hamrlik was one of these great players. Just like a fascinating player. He's drafted number 1 overall by the Lightning. He's this kid out of the Czech Republic. He barely speaks English. He's getting thrown into this team that has no support system whatsoever. Pretty sure they're still playing at the fairgrounds when he made his debut. I think there's almost one of these legendary stories that Terry Crisp couldn't find him one day. They're looking around all over the place for Roman Hamrlik, and they find him fishing in a pond out behind this, that temporary stadium that they built over there. So the kid, he's just a kid. He's 18 years old or whatever. But yeah, like you said, he was going to be the cornerstone of that defense. He was going to be that offensive defenseman. He had the skills, he had the talent, and he had some pretty good seasons with the Lightning. I mean, he put up 185 points in 377 games. He had 3 seasons of 12 plus goals in a row. The kid could score from the blue line. There was just some question about his dedication to the game. There's some thoughts that maybe Crisp was a little bit too hard on him, let him play his game, kind of tried to force him, the square the square peg into the round hole kind of thing. Sometimes you got to let these kids be what they are. So like you said, Trader Phil tried to trade him earlier in the year. There were some rumors that he had tried to trade him for Rod Brindamore. It's funny, if you read Esposito's autobiography, I think he tries to trade for Rod Brindamore about 14 different times. But he really liked Rod the Bod, but never quite came through. But again, it comes down to money. Hammerlick was making a pretty decent chunk of change. You also have the fact that at this point, the Lightning were for sale. The Japanese owners were looking to sell them. The Maloof brothers, some of you NBA fans may recognize that name, were really interested in buying them and were coming pretty close to the point where, at least according to Phil, they had some input into roster decisions. And one of the things that they had basically told Phil is, we want to cut the payroll. And Roman Hamrlick's making $3 million or something like that. We don't want to pay him that. So you have to find a way to trade him. He eventually ends up dealing him to Edmonton. I think he kind of waited a little bit too long. There were some reported offers of I think at one point Jason Arnott for Hamrlick was on the table, which would have been an interesting deal. But yeah, he kind of waits too long. I think I referred to it as the old 4 quarters for $1 kind of trade. There was some pedigree with Bonsignor and Steve Kelly. They were both first-round picks by Edmonton. They both had speed. Bonsignor was a pretty big guy too, so he had kind of that speed, that size that you kind of look for. Their only problem is they just couldn't score. I mean, I don't want to rip on the two guys. They just weren't very good at NHL hockey. As good as they were in juniors, just didn't translate. And probably a little rudderless direction in Tampa while they were there as well. Brian Marchment is who he was. Phil's never going to turn down the chance to trade for somebody who's going to punch somebody in the face. So he brought Marchment in. And it just didn't work out. It's kind of one of these perfect storms of no money, pressure from management, and a guy who was probably the Lightning's only real trade chip at the time. And Phil just didn't make a good deal. So I would say it probably set back the Lightning a little bit at that time for him.
And Roman Hamrlick went on to play 1,300 games in the league. He bounced around for a while. He was never quite used as that cornerstone defenseman like the Lightning thought he was going to be. But Roman Hamrlick had one hell of a career. Now, the year that the Lightning made the playoffs, he had 60 points, and he had a point a game in the playoffs. So Roman Hamrlick had game. He was a good player. He was good with the Bolts. Did he fall out of favor? I think you're probably right. When Terry Crisp won the Stanley Cup in Calgary, he wanted his teams to play with not a whole lot of freelancing. When you see the kind of player that Roman Hamrlick was, that wasn't his kind of player.
Yeah. And I think, honestly, with that, that era of Lightning teams, they probably should have been more tight to the vest, more defensively structured, just because they didn't have the guns to run with some of the teams out there in the league. And yeah, Hamrlick just wasn't. He probably would have been all right if he had the right coach, but the guy ended up playing almost 1,400 games in the NHL. That's pretty impressive, no matter how you do it. So, like you said, he ended up having a really good long career, and went on, to do what he did. Probably not. He's not a Hall of Famer, but he's a solid defensive player.
There's not too many guys that have played 1,300 games in the league on the blue line. Now, Justin, we went from talking about the bad trades. Let's talk about some of the really good ones. And I'm going to throw a trade at you right now that probably was the cornerstone of the Bolts winning the 2004 Stanley Cup. Stanislav Neskash and the rights to Nikolai Habibulin go to Tampa for Paul Mara, Mike Johnson, Ruslan Zanulin, and a 2001 second-round pick. This was done in March 5th, 2001, and probably the biggest deal the Lightning ever made.
Yeah, I mean, at this time, this was the Tampa Tribune, as I did the research, referred to it the day it happened as the most significant trade in Lightning history. The Lightning were building that foundation for the 2004 Stanley Cup team. You had Vinny Lecavalier on the ice. You had Brad Richards on the ice. You had Pavel Kabina on the blue line. They were kind of that core team was there. You just didn't have the goaltender. It's something that's the Lightning had struggled with since Pupa hurt his back. They tried Dan Cloutier as the number one. They tried Kevin Weeks as the number one. They were good, but they just weren't what the Lightning needed. So they go out Nikolai Habibulin had been sitting out of hockey for basically 2 seasons. So Rick Dudley, who's the GM at the time, puts together a really good package here. This is a big deal for Lightning history. Paul Mara was one of their most highly regarded prospects at the time when they drafted him. Basically, a lot of people compared him to Paul Coffey, a smooth skating, offensive minded defenseman who's going to man your PowerPoint. He's going to put up the big points. So they part with him. Mike Johnson had been a revelation with him. He was a fast, speedy winger who could score. Ruslan, the Russian, never kind of made it over, but he had the reputation as a big physical player. The second round pick, and they're taking a big chance that they can sign Javi Bulin. It wasn't guaranteed that they were going to be able to sign this guy. He was looking for like $4 million a year on a long-term deal. Arizona at the time didn't want to do it. So, like I said, he had sat up for 2 years. This is a guy who was a two-time All-Star prior to it. He played in the IHL the year before, was just taking the year off. And the Lightning were like, this is the guy we want. We're going to go through. There were some other teams looking at him. I think Chicago was in the mix. The Rangers were in the mix. But the way the deal was consummated was also pretty interesting. So as they're working it out and the rumors are going around, right as the trade deadline is approaching, they're also doing the general manager meetings. So Rick Dudley, GM at the time with the Lightning, gets into a car with Cliff Fletcher in Phoenix, and they make the 5-hour drive to Palm Springs, California for the general managers meeting. During that 5-hour drive, they hashed out the deal that would end up coming together. I think Fletcher said there were a few times when he wanted to throw Dudley out of the car, a few times Dudley wanted to throw Fletcher out of the car. But they hammered it out in the end, and the Lightning pulled it off. They ended up signing Javi Bulin to a long-term deal that I think it was like 3 years. It was 3 or 4 years, but the big thing was that the deal kicked in right away. So he basically burned a year, but he still got about $3 million or so. It was a little bit below what his asking time was, but I think they kicked in the extra year, so it paid off. He's now the guy in net. He's the undisputed number one. There's no doubt about it. He backstops them to a decent playoff run in 02-03. The Lightning kind of get their feet wet. And then that magical 03-04 season where he's the bedrock of their defensive play during the Stanley Cup run. And yeah, it was great. So it was a really good deal. And then Stan Neshcash was a solid defenseman for him as well. Let's not forget that. He played 2 seasons where he was averaging between 18 and 20 minutes. They actually didn't re-sign him after the 03 season. He goes off to Nashville. He's nursing a groin injury the entire time. And then at the trade deadline in 04, the one deal the Lightning made on the deadline deal was to send a draft pick over to Nashville for Neshcash. He was hurt at the time. He was dealing with a groin injury, I believe, so he didn't play the rest of the regular season. But he pops in for 2 playoff games during that Eastern Conference Finals battle with Philly when they needed him because there were some injuries. Some guys have been dinged up a little bit. He jumps in, plays 10, 15 minutes. They win 1 game, they lose 1 game. But he was kind of that death roll kind of defenseman that really helped out that team. So yeah, that was like they said, it's probably the most significant trade for that 04 team.
Now, another deal that allowed the Lightning to get a cornerstone member of their franchise was the Andrei Nazarov deal. It was the rights to swap first-round picks in the 98 draft for Brian Marchment, David Shaw, and that swapped first-round pick. But, Justin, who did this trade that you sort of look at the actual deal? It's like, okay, it was a trade. No one really won. No one really lost. But it allowed the Lightning to get a huge piece.
Yeah, so it was kind of interesting. Like, if you look at the actual players that got moved in the deal, it's Andrei Nazarov, big, huge, hulking forward, moved for Brian Marchment, like we mentioned, and David Shaw. Those aren't game-changing players. The big part of this deal was the pick swap. And what made it interesting is, first of all, it's not San Jose's pick that ends up getting traded. It's actually Florida's pick that gets traded. But the key factor to this deal is that the Lightning were able to choose which first-round draft pick to use. And the big key of it is they could choose after the draft lottery had happened. So a lot of times with these deals is you end up getting the higher or lower of the deal before the draft lottery happens. Now, what Esposito did, and it's probably one of the smartest things he ever did, is he convinced San Jose to let him make the deal afterwards because he really wanted Lecavalier. Another cravat of the deal is that the Lightning did have to finish with the first or second worst record in the league in order for it to happen. which they did. They'd actually gone on a little bit of a winning streak when the deal had happened, which was jeopardizing that a bit. So, but they still managed to finish with the worst record in the league that year. So they were able to use that clause. Draft lottery comes out. The Lightning actually lost the draft lottery. They were supposed to pick second, but because Florida's pick had ended up number one, and he had that clause, he could swap. He was able to get Vinny Lecavalier instead of David Legwand, who probably would have ended up being a decent player for the Lightning. I mean, he had a pretty good career with Nashville, but Lecavalier was the guy. I think anybody who remembers the '04 finals remembers Lecavalier fighting with Jerome McNeil. He had that skill. He had that physical play. He's always, in all honesty, he's my favorite Lightning player of all time. I'm a Vinny guy. It will always be. It also led to the, is he a dud or a stud? Some Art Williams magic moments, the Michael Jordan of hockey, all that good stuff. So just think of all the entertainment we would not have had if David Legwand had been drafted instead of Vinny Lecavalier.
Now, there's a couple trades that definitely were complete wins. Dan Boyle in January 2002 for a 5th-round pick from the Florida Panthers when Dan Boyle fell out of favor with Mike Keenan. Alexander Selivanov, early in the Lightning's infancy, was traded from the Philadelphia Flyers to the Bolts for a 4th-round pick. But Justin, let's go off the radar here. A trade that probably most people have forgotten about, but it was Gary Roberts and the rights to Ryan Malone to the Pittsburgh Penguins for a 3rd-round pick. It wasn't as if Gary Roberts was a great Tampa Bay Lightning player. His stats, he was at the end of his career. But why was this deal so important?
So this is one of those, like you said, under the radar deals. It's 2008. The Lightning know they're going to draft Steven Stamkos number 1 overall. They're going to get the savior of the franchise that come in. And what they wanted to do at the time is surround him with some veterans. They signed Mark Recchi to a deal. They make this trade for Gary Roberts and the rights to Ryan Malone. Malone was this young kid in Pittsburgh. He's putting up 20-goal seasons. So there's some supporting offense for Stamkos. You already have Lecavalier and St. Louis on the team as well. The thing with Gary Roberts is you bring him in. He's a veteran. I think he was 42 at the time they signed him.
That sounds about right.
But he had also rebuilt his career. He'd been out of hockey basically for a year, a few seasons earlier. He develops this great fitness regime. He becomes probably the most in-shape player in the NHL. And he forms a bond with Stamkos over that first season that they played together. Roberts didn't even last the entire season. He actually retired in March of that season. So it wasn't even like a full 82-game stretch. But he gets in tight with Stamkos. Stamkos, this 18-year-old kid with all the talent in the world, learns what it takes to be an NHL player in terms of fitness. He goes to work out with Stamkos, or he goes to work out with Roberts in the summer. He comes back. I think he said he put on 9 pounds of muscle, lost 5 pounds of fat, and was just fitter. So he learns how to train like an NHL player. After that first season where he was scratched a few times, he comes back, he puts up 51 goals the next year and turns into the Steven Stamkos we know. And all the stories you talk about Stamkos is how he's just an absolute workout fiend. And I don't think that happens if Gary Roberts isn't on his bench teaching him what he needs to be as an NHLer. So it's kind of these little things that it's not always about the goals, the assists, the saves. It's learning mentally how to be an NHLer. And by happenstance, this just happens. And all it took him was a 3rd-round pick. It was actually a 4th-round pick that was conditional if Malone signed with the Lightning, and Malone ends up signing. It's a 3rd-round pick. Jay, you grew up in Pittsburgh. Who did the Penguins draft with that pick? Could you have known that if we hadn't had a cheat sheet on this?
No, not at all.
So they drafted Ben Hanowski, whose probably biggest claim to fame as a member of the Penguins was that he was part of the Jerome McNeil trade a few years later. So
back in 2013, that
exactly.
I don't think anybody that the Penguins sent to Calgary had a meaningful NHL career. That deal, and Iginla was pretty forgettable, honestly, as a Penguin.
Yeah. So when Julian Brisebois nowadays gets criticized a lot for the number of draft picks that he's willing to deal in order to make his deadline deals. But again, these are just lottery picks, man. Nobody knows what's going to happen with these kids. And if you can secure somebody who helps your team now, as opposed to someone who maybe will help 5 years down the road, or turns into a Ben Hanowski. And you're like, I'm sure he's a great guy, but he never did anything in the NHL. Whereas you get Gary Robertson, you get Ryan Malone, who had a really good career with the Lightning. He scored 92 goals, 109 assists, 3 20-goal seasons with the Lightning. You get Gary Roberts, who teaches Steven Stamkos how to be an NHL player. That's worth way more than a third round pick. So sometimes people get a little too hung up on picks, what they could be, and what their value is, when should just focus on what actually happens with those deals.
Well, we talked about traveling with the Lightning. So far, we've taken you to St. Louis, we've taken you to Denver, up north into Manitoba to Winnipeg. Now we're going to take you to Dallas. It's a city that I've been there numerous times. I was actually there this week. Justin's been there a couple times. I was able to see Mark Recchi's 500th goal in 2007 at the arena down there. The Arena 1 is huge. Justin, I know you haven't seen a game there. The arena, great sight lines. It reminds me a lot of the Xcel Energy Center up in Minnesota. It probably holds about 19,000 people.
That's the Grand Casino Arena now, sir, in St. Paul.
Grand Casino.
Grand Casino. Let's get it right.
I can't. I lose track of all these. I mean, even in Pittsburgh, Acrisure Stadium is now the name for Heinz Field.
Yeah, it'll always be Heinz Field.
Exactly. But the one thing I would say about Dallas that really I still remember is the parking there. If you get there close to game time, parking there is an absolute mess. Do yourself a favor, get there at least an hour beforehand, find your parking, mosey on down to the arena. There's some restaurants around the arena to eat at. Take your time and get there, because if you get there at game time, it is hard to get there. I sat in traffic one time. I missed the first period of a game because work didn't allow me to get down there until 20 minutes before face-off, and it was just complete gridlock. But Justin, Dallas, other than hockey, still has a ton to offer. What are some of the things that stood out in your mind?
Well, I will say one thing that I always think about when I'm in Dallas is exactly what you had mentioned, is gridlock. I don't know if I've ever been to a town that has either as many roads, as many overpasses as Dallas Fort Worth area does. I mean, everything is highway. It's always there's always traffic. I don't think we've ever driven anywhere together down there where we haven't been in some sort of traffic. Just the absolute amount of human beings moving back and forth in large pickup trucks is fascinating. But once you get there, it is a great town. I've always had fun there. We've gone to a couple Rangers games. We've walked past Jerry World, which is just everything
immense.
Yeah, it's the largest sports structure I've ever seen in my life. And you can see why, Jerry Jones is who Jerry Jones is. Globe Fields.
How about them Cowboys?
Both Globe Fields that we attended to were fun. Yeah, the Texas stadiums were great. The food is fantastic. I mean, I'm not a man who's ever going to turn barbecue down, and you can throw a stone and hit 13 different barbecue places, and 12 of them are going to be really, really good. So yeah,
the ones that I recommend though, and again, as someone who goes to Dallas multiple times in the year, Hard Eight Barbecue. They're initially in Stevensville. They have multiple locations around the Metroplex. And Hutchins, place that I was told about and I decided to try a couple trips ago. They have a location in Frisco near the Cowboys practice facility. They also have one in McKinney. Really good. Get the dino ribs. It's going to cost you a fortune, but it's worth it.
Yeah, and anytime you go into these places, you just come out smelling like smoked meat, which is never a bad thing. You feel like you've done the worst thing in the world as far as eating way too much, but the food is delightful. Hard Eight, definitely a good recommendation. Yes, take out a small mortgage to feed yourself, but it's still well worth it. But other things to do. I think we've had a blast down there every time we've gone down there. The last time we did go to. Finally got our way over to Dealey Plaza to check out the world famous JFK assassination site. As somebody who grew up in the mid 90s when JFK, the movie with Kevin Costner, was released, did I do my way too rabbit hole deep dive into the conspiracy theories? Of course. So to be able to visit that site and look out the window of the 6th floor of the Texas school book depository was great, and you kind of stand there on the grassy knoll, you see the train tracks, you read the history. I think the museum exhibit itself is really, really good. It goes over everything, a lot of cool exhibits in there. And the fact that you can just sit there and, that they have the boxes stacked exactly the way they were when Oswald took the shot. And yes, I do believe Oswald acted alone after all my research. I still think he was just some disgruntled guy who shot the president. So sorry, folks. The mob or the CIA probably wasn't involved, but it's just fun to see that kind of stuff. So that was kind of a highlight of one of the trips that we took down there.
And Justin, one place that I had a chance to go, it's about 30 minutes west of Dallas in Fort Worth. It's the Fort Worth Stockyards. They have live music. It's Western heritage. They have a livestock market, and twice a day they have a cattle drive and a rodeo. It sort of takes you back to the Old West. But every time we talk about random places to go, I try to mention one in each city. If you're a fan of the TV show Dallas, head out to South Fork. You can take a tour of the South Fork Ranch. You can see where they shot many of the scenes of the famous TV show. One of my favorite parts of South Fork is they have a room with each character and every liaison they had during the show. Now, of course, Pam, Bobby, they had 6, 7, 8, and JR's went all across the room. JR basically slept with everybody on the show. But one of my favorite parts of Dallas, and Justin and I were talking about this before the show, Lucy, who was JR's sister, had a thing with Ray Krebs, the farmhand. Later on in the show, you find out that Ray's her uncle.
Yeah. So it was, Dallas to me growing up, I think it was one of my mom's favorite shows. So that theme song is just embedded in the back of my head. Every time the opening credits, scanning over the city of Dallas from the 1980s, it looks completely different now. There's a couple of recognizable buildings when you fly into the town, but still, anytime anyone says the word Dallas, it's just that theme song just pops into the back of my head. That sounds like a fun thing to do. Like you said, some of the just off the beaten path kind of stuff. And I do believe this is at least the second time you've mentioned a rodeo in this little travel breakdown. So we haven't even gotten to Calgary yet. So yeah, it's there's always just good times to do in these cities. And Dallas is such a big city. There's always something to do. And it's just a fun town.
Hey, Justin, real quick, what's going on at Raw Charge?
We're just looking forward to the end of the Olympics here, getting back into things. Going to write up a couple posts about the injuries that we had here, working on an update of our top 25 under 25 countdown, where we go over the best prospects in the Lightning system. Was working on that today until other news kind of broke and had to focus on something else. But going to go over some of the performances of those rookies, which ones are probably going to move up the list, which ones are off the list now because the Lightning have made a couple trades. So yeah, and then kind of take a look at the rest of the season as the Lightning get back underway. They're back at practice now. There are some shots from their social media team kind of showing the kids back on the ice. So kind of getting back into that excitement of ramping things up. I was going to say, I'm pretty sure everyone has an opinion on what the worst trade of the Julien Brisebois era is, but we're not going to spoil that until next week.
Right now, the Bolts are practicing over in Brandon. Their next game is going to be on Wednesday, but we're going to be coming back to you later this weekend. We're going to give you another Olympic update. We're also going to break down the best and worst trades for the Bolts during the Yzerman and Brisebois eras.
Yeah, and we're not going to spoil anything right now, but I'm pretty sure everyone out there listening is quite aware of what the worst trade in the Brisebois era is. So we're going to see if that makes our list and in what position.
Well, we look forward to having you back, and we'll wait and see if everyone can guess that worst trade. For Justin Godfrey, I'm Jason Linkus. Thanks for listening, and go Bolts.
Go Bolts.
Thank you for listening to Backchecking the Bolts. We are free and available on all platforms, including Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon, YouTube, and Deezer. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to subscribe and leave a review. You can follow Justin on Blue Sky at rawcharge.com. You can follow the show on X at Tampa_Bolts_pod and on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Backchecking the Bolts. If you're interested in advertising on the show or partnering with us, you can find more information in the show notes or email Jason at backcheckingthebolts@yahoo.com.